Maya Rodriguez had always been careful about boundaries. As the head of marketing for Sterling Industries, she knew exactly where the lines were drawn between professional and personal, between employee and employer, between dreams and reality. But on that sweltering July evening, as she stood at the edge of the infinity pool at the company's executive retreat center, those carefully maintained boundaries seemed as distant as the mountain peaks silhouetted against the darkening sky. The retreat center was supposed to be empty. Everyone had left hours ago after the quarterly strategy meeting, their luxury cars disappearing down the winding mountain road like a parade of corporate success stories. Maya had volunteered to stay behind to finalize the presentation materials for Monday's board meeting, a task that could have waited but served as a perfect excuse to avoid returning to her empty apartment in the city. The conference room had felt suffocating after hours of spreadsheets and projections, and the building's air conditioning had given up somewhere around sunset. Maya had wandered through the sprawling glass and steel structure, marveling at how different it felt without the usual buzz of executive activity. The retreat center was a monument to wealth and power, all clean lines and breathtaking views, designed to inspire and intimidate in equal measure. She had discovered the pool area almost by accident, following a hallway that led to what she assumed was another conference room. Instead, she found herself standing before floor-to-ceiling windows that opened onto a terrace where an infinity pool seemed to spill directly into the valley below. The water was illuminated from below, casting dancing patterns of blue light across the surrounding deck. Maya checked her phone. No missed calls, no urgent emails. Her boss, Alexander Sterling, was probably back at his penthouse by now, reviewing acquisition reports or planning his next billion-dollar move. The thought of him brought a familiar tightness to her chest, a combination of professional admiration and something else she refused to acknowledge. She had worked for Sterling Industries for 3 years, rising through the ranks faster than anyone expected, including herself. Her campaigns had doubled the company's market share in key demographics, and her strategic thinking had earned her a seat at tables previously reserved for Ivy League graduates and family connections. But Alexander Sterling remained an enigma, a figure she interacted with in boardrooms and video conferences, but never truly knew. He was younger than most billionaires, having inherited Sterling Industries at 28 when his father died suddenly. The business magazines loved to feature him on covers, calling him everything from the reluctant heir to America's most eligible bachelor. But Maya had seen glimpses of something deeper during late-night strategy sessions, moments when his carefully controlled facade would slip and reveal a man carrying burdens she couldn't imagine. The pool beckoned, its surface mirror-smooth and inviting. Maya had been swimming competitively in college before financial pressures forced her to focus entirely on her studies. She missed the feeling of moving through water, the way it seemed to wash away everything except the present moment. She glanced around the empty terrace one more time, then made a decision that would change everything. Her business clothes felt restrictive and formal as she carefully folded them on a nearby chair. The evening air was warm against her skin as she stood at the pool's edge in her simple undergarments, feeling simultaneously vulnerable and liberated. The water was perfect, heated to exactly the right temperature. Maya slipped in gradually, savoring the sensation as it enveloped her. She began swimming laps, her body remembering the rhythm and flow she had once mastered. Each stroke felt like a small rebellion against the constraints of corporate life, against the careful personas they all wore like expensive suits. She lost herself in the movement, in the play of light on water, in the way the pool seemed to extend infinitely into the darkening landscape. This was what she had been missing, this sense of freedom and possibility that had nothing to do with profit margins or market penetration. Maya was floating on her back, gazing up at the first stars beginning to appear when she heard the sound of footsteps on stone. She turned, expecting to see a security guard or maintenance worker, but instead found herself looking directly at Alexander Sterling. He stood frozen in the doorway leading from the building, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. His tie was loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and there was something in his expression that she had never seen before. Surprise, certainly, but also something else. something that made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with her recent swimming. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, neither of them moved. Maya was acutely aware of her state of undress, of the way the pool lights played across her skin, of the sudden charge in the air between them. She had dreamed about moments like this, in ways she would never admit to herself in daylight. But the reality was far more intense than any fantasy. Alexander's gaze traveled slowly from her face to where the water lapped at her shoulders, then back to her eyes. There was no judgment there, no disapproval, just an intensity that made breathing difficult. Maya felt exposed in a way that went far beyond the physical, as if he could see directly into her carefully guarded thoughts. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice rougher than usual. "I didn't know anyone was still here. I came back for some files I forgot." Maya treaded water, buying time to process what was happening. The smart thing would be to apologize profusely, to explain herself, to restore the professional distance that had always existed between them. Instead, she found herself saying, "The building was so hot. I thought everyone had left." "They had," Alexander said, still not moving from the doorway. "I should go." But he didn't go. He stood there, and Maya remained in the water, and the space between them hummed with possibilities neither of them had ever dared to voice. She could see him struggling with something, the same careful control he exercised in every business dealing suddenly, applied to this unexpected situation. Maya made another impulsive decision. Instead of swimming to the ladder and rushing to cover herself, she glided closer to where he stood. "You don't have to go. It's your pool." Something shifted in Alexander's expression at her words. The formal distance he maintained with all his employees seemed to crack slightly, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the corporate exterior. "Actually, it's the company's pool." "Even better," Maya said, surprised by her own boldness. "That makes it partly mine too." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. It was the first time she had ever seen him look genuinely amused rather than politely entertained during their professional interactions. "I suppose you have a point," he said, "though I'm not sure the board would appreciate that interpretation of employee benefits." Maya laughed, a genuine sound that echoed off the water. "What they don't know won't hurt them." Alexander loosened his tie further, and Maya noticed the way his hair fell across his forehead when it wasn't perfectly styled. There was something younger about him like this, less intimidating and more human. "You're an excellent swimmer," he observed, and Maya realized he must have been watching her for longer than she had initially thought. "I used to compete," she said, "before life got in the way." "Life has a way of doing that," Alexander agreed, and there was something in his tone that suggested personal experience with abandoned dreams. The conversation felt surreal, floating there in the illuminated pool while her billionaire boss stood fully clothed on the deck above her. It was the most personal exchange they had ever had, built on this moment of unexpected vulnerability. Maya found herself studying his face in the soft pool lighting, noticing details she had never been close enough to see before. The way his eyes were more green than blue, the small scar near his left temple, the tension he carried in his jaw even during this unguarded moment. He was handsome in the way that money and good genetics could create. But there was something else there, a complexity that intrigued her far more than mere physical attraction. "The water's perfect," she said, extending an invitation she never would have dared make under any other circumstances. Alexander glanced toward the building, then back at her. Maya could practically see him weighing professional obligations against personal desire, duty against temptation. It was a calculation she recognized because she had been making similar ones for years. "I shouldn't," he said, but his hands were already moving to his tie, removing it completely this time. "Probably not," Maya agreed. "But when was the last time you did something just because you wanted to?" The question seemed to hit him harder than she had expected. Alexander paused in the act of unbuttoning his shirt, looking at her with an expression that was almost vulnerable. "I honestly can't remember," he said quietly. Maya felt something shift between them, a deeper understanding that transcended their usual employer-employee dynamic. She was seeing him not as the untouchable billionaire who appeared in business magazines, but as a man who might be just as trapped by expectations and responsibilities as she sometimes felt. "Then, maybe it's time," she said softly. Alexander finished unbuttoning his shirt, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Maya turned away slightly, giving him privacy while fighting the urge to watch. She heard the soft sounds of clothing being placed on furniture, then the gentle splash as he entered the water. When she turned back, he was floating a respectful distance away, the pool lights playing across his shoulders and chest. Without the armor of his expensive suits, he looked different. Still powerful, but somehow more accessible, more real. They swam in comfortable silence for several minutes, each maintaining their own space in the large pool. Maya found herself hyper-aware of every movement, every breath, every ripple in the water between them. The setting sun had given way to full darkness, and the illuminated pool felt like their own private world, separate from the corporate reality that awaited them beyond these walls. "This is incredibly inappropriate," Alexander said eventually, though his tone held more wonder than regret. "Completely," Maya agreed. "I should probably fire myself for this." "Don't," he said quickly, then seemed surprised by his own urgency. "I mean, that won't be necessary." Maya smiled. "Good. I like my job. Even with a boss who apparently lurks around empty buildings in the evening." "I was the one lurking first," Maya pointed out. "You just happened to walk into my moment of questionable judgment." "Our moment," Alexander corrected, and something in the way he said it made Maya's pulse quicken. They drifted closer without either of them making a conscious decision to do so. The pool suddenly felt smaller, more intimate, despite its impressive size. Maya could see the water droplets on Alexander's eyelashes, could hear the slight change in his breathing. "This changes things," he said, and it wasn't a question. Maya nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. They couldn't simply return to their previous dynamic after this, couldn't pretend this moment of raw honesty and attraction had never happened. "What happens on Monday?" she asked. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I suppose we'll find out." The practical part of Maya's mind was already cataloging all the reasons why this was dangerous, all the ways it could complicate their working relationship and potentially destroy her career. But that voice was increasingly drowned out by something stronger, something that had been building for years in stolen glances and professional admiration. "Are you going to regret this tomorrow?" she asked. Alexander moved closer, close enough that she could see the conflict playing across his features. "Probably." "Are you?" "Definitely," Maya said, then smiled. "But not tonight." The admission seemed to break down the last of Alexander's resistance. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently brushed a strand of wet hair from her face. His touch was electric, sending waves of sensation through her that had nothing to do with the warm water surrounding them. "You're extraordinary," he said quietly. "I've thought so since the day you presented that market analysis that everyone said was impossible." Maya's breath caught. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about that day," Alexander said. "The way you refused to back down when the other executives questioned your data. The way you looked when you proved them all wrong. I've been trying not to notice you ever since." The confession hung between them like a bridge across an impossible divide. Maya felt years of careful professional distance crumbling, replaced by something that was far more dangerous and infinitely more compelling. "I've been trying not to notice you too," she admitted. "It hasn't been working very well." Alexander's hand was still touching her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Maya leaned into the contact, all pretense of professional propriety finally abandoned. "This is insane," he whispered, but he didn't pull away. "Completely," Maya agreed, moving closer until the space between them could be measured in inches rather than feet. The pool lights continued their underwater dance, casting shifting patterns across their skin. Somewhere in the distance, night birds were calling to each other across the valley. But Maya was aware of nothing except the man in front of her, the way he was looking at her like she was something precious and dangerous all at once. When Alexander finally kissed her, it was with the same careful intensity he brought to everything else in his life. Maya felt herself drowning in a way that had nothing to do with water, swept away by the force of attraction that had been building between them for years. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, and Maya found herself pressed against the smooth wall of the pool with Alexander's body warm and solid against hers. Every rational thought she possessed was telling her to stop, to think about the consequences, to remember who they were in the daylight world. But the night felt infinite, and the water was warm, and for the first time in years Maya allowed herself to want something without calculating the cost. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing. The drive back to the city the next morning felt like a journey between two different worlds. Maya sat in her car, still processing what had happened at the retreat center, her fingers unconsciously touching her lips where Alexander's kiss still seemed to linger. The professional clothes she had carefully folded the night before felt like a costume now, a disguise she was putting on to play a role that no longer fit quite right. They had stayed in the pool until nearly midnight, talking in ways they had never allowed themselves before. Alexander had told her about the pressure of inheriting a company at such a young age, about nights when he lay awake wondering if he was making decisions that would affect thousands of employees' livelihoods. Maya had shared her own struggles, the way she sometimes felt like an imposter in boardrooms full of people who had never worried about student loans or family obligations. But even as they had grown closer, the reality of their situation loomed larger. When Alexander had finally walked her to her car, they had both been careful not to make promises or plans. The kiss goodnight had been tender but brief, weighted with the knowledge that everything would look different in the morning light. Now, navigating the familiar streets toward her apartment, Maya tried to reconcile the woman who had boldly invited her boss to join her in a moonlit pool with the marketing executive who had presentations to prepare and emails to answer. The two versions of herself felt incompatible, and she wasn't sure which one was more real. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Maya's heart jumped, thinking it might be Alexander, but the name on the screen was her assistant, Jennifer, reminding her about the 9 a.m. strategy meeting that had been moved to Monday morning. The same meeting where Maya would have to sit across a conference table from Alexander and pretend that everything between them was exactly as it had always been. Maya's apartment felt too quiet when she finally arrived. She had chosen it for its proximity to the office and its clean, minimalist aesthetic, but now it struck her as almost sterile. The carefully curated art and designer furniture seemed to mock the chaos of emotions she was feeling. She spent the weekend in a state of restless anticipation, alternating between replaying every moment by the pool and trying to prepare herself for the inevitable awkwardness that would follow. Part of her hoped that Alexander would call or text, while another part dreaded any communication that might force them to define what had happened between them. By Sunday evening, Maya had convinced herself that the whole experience had been a momentary lapse in judgment that they would both quietly agree to forget. It was the only logical conclusion, the only way to preserve their working relationship and her career trajectory. She went to bed early, setting her alarm for an hour earlier than usual to give herself extra time to prepare for what was sure to be a challenging day. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, as if the weather itself was reflecting Maya's mood. She dressed with particular care, choosing a navy blue suit that projected confidence and competence, armor for the battle she expected to face. Her reflection looked composed and professional, giving no hint of the turmoil beneath the surface. The Sterling Industries building rose 43 floors into the Seattle sky, its glass facade reflecting the low-hanging clouds. Maya had been working there long enough that entering the lobby should have felt routine, but today every security guard and elevator operator seemed to be studying her with unusual interest. She told herself it was paranoia, but the feeling persisted as she rode the elevator to the executive floor. The strategy meeting was being held in the main conference room, a space designed to intimidate and impress. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while the long mahogany table could seat 20 people comfortably. Maya arrived 15 minutes early, as was her habit, and was surprised to find several other executives already there. Robert Chun, the chief financial officer, looked up as she entered. "Maya, good morning. How was the retreat center? I heard you stayed late to finish the board presentation." "Just tying up some loose ends," Maya replied, grateful for the excuse to focus on her materials rather than make eye contact with the other attendees. More executives filtered in over the next few minutes, each carrying tablets and coffee cups, discussing market fluctuations and quarterly projections. Maya found herself watching the door, tension building with each new arrival that wasn't Alexander. When he finally entered the room at exactly 9 o'clock, Maya felt her breath catch despite her efforts to remain composed. Alexander looked impeccable as always, his charcoal gray suit perfectly tailored, his dark hair styled with mathematical precision. But Maya noticed things she had never paid attention to before. The way he carried himself, the subtle scan he made of the room before taking his seat, the brief moment when his eyes met hers before quickly moving away. "Good morning, everyone," Alexander said, settling at the head of the table. His voice was the same commanding tone he always used in meetings, giving no indication that anything had changed. "Let's begin with the third quarter analysis." Maya forced herself to focus on the presentation materials, falling back on years of professional training to carry her through. She delivered her portion of the report with the same confidence and clarity that had earned her reputation in the company, but she was hyper-aware of Alexander's presence throughout. He asked questions about market penetration and demographic targeting, the same kinds of analytical inquiries he had always made. But Maya found herself studying his hands as he gestured, remembering how they had felt on her skin. When he looked directly at her while she was explaining a particularly complex marketing strategy, she had to pause for a fraction of a second to regain her composure. The meeting proceeded normally, with various executives presenting their reports and Alexander providing strategic direction. To any outside observer, it would have appeared to be a routine corporate gathering. But Maya felt an undercurrent of tension that she was certain only she and Alexander could sense. About halfway through the meeting, Alexander's phone buzzed with what appeared to be an urgent message. He glanced at it, then looked around the table. "I need to take a brief call," he said, standing. "Please continue with the quarterly projections. I'll be back in a few minutes." As he moved toward the door, Alexander's path took him directly behind Maya's chair. For just a moment, his hand brushed against her shoulder, so lightly it could have been accidental. But Maya felt the contact like an electric shock, and she was certain it was deliberate. The meeting continued in Alexander's absence, but Maya found it difficult to concentrate on the financial reports being discussed. Robert Chun was analyzing cost projections when Alexander returned, slipping back into his seat with minimal disruption. "My apologies," he said. "Please continue, Robert." The final hour of the meeting passed in a blur of spreadsheets and strategic planning. Maya contributed when expected, asked appropriate questions, and maintained her professional facade. But she was counting the minutes until she could escape the suffocating atmosphere of enforced normalcy. When Alexander finally dismissed the meeting, Maya began gathering her materials quickly, hoping to avoid any awkward moments. But as the other executives filed out, discussing lunch plans and afternoon appointments, she found herself moving slower than intended. "Maya," Alexander said, just as she was about to reach the door, "could you stay for a moment? I have some questions about the demographic analysis." Maya turned back, surprised to find that they were now alone in the conference room. Alexander had moved to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the city below. "The presentation was excellent, as always," he said without turning around. "Your insights into the 25 to 35 demographic could be game-changing for our expansion plans." "Thank you," Maya replied carefully, unsure whether this was genuine feedback or a pretext for something else. Alexander finally turned to face her, and Maya was struck by the exhaustion she saw in his expression. He looked like a man who hadn't slept well, who had spent the weekend wrestling with the same conflicted feelings she had experienced. "About Friday night," he began, then stopped, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I want you to know that it doesn't change anything professionally. Your job is secure, your career trajectory is exactly what it was before." Maya felt a stab of disappointment that she tried to hide. "I understand. It was an isolated incident." "Was it?" Alexander asked quietly, and there was something vulnerable in his voice that made Maya's heart race. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the corporate executive to the man who had kissed her in the moonlight. "I don't know. Was it?" Alexander moved closer, close enough that Maya could see the conflict playing out in his eyes. "I've been trying to convince myself it was. I've been telling myself that it was just the setting, the circumstances, the fact that we both let our guards down for one evening." "And?" Maya prompted, her voice barely above a whisper. And I can't stop thinking about you, Alexander admitted. I've been thinking about you for years, actually, but now it's impossible to ignore. Maya felt her carefully constructed professional walls beginning to crumble again. Alexander, this is incredibly complicated. I know, he said. I know all the reasons why it's impossible. The company policies, the power dynamic, the potential for scandal. I've been listing them in my head since Saturday morning. But? Maya asked, sensing there was more. Alexander reached out slowly, the same way he had by the pool, and gently touched her hand. But I've never felt anything like what I felt Friday night. And I think you felt it too. Maya's breath caught. She should pull her hand away, should remind him of all those reasons he had just mentioned, should protect both their careers by maintaining appropriate boundaries. Instead, she found herself stepping closer. I did feel it, she admitted. I've been trying to convince myself it was just the moment, just the wine from dinner, and the setting, and the fact that I was feeling rebellious. And? Alexander asked, echoing her earlier prompt. And I've been lying to myself, Maya said. I've been attracted to you since the day I started working here. I've just been very good at hiding it. Alexander's thumb traced across her knuckles, a small gesture that sent waves of sensation up her arm. So what do we do now? It was the question Maya had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. She looked around the conference room, at the mahogany table where they had just spent 2 hours discussing profit margins and market strategies, at the windows that offered a view of the corporate world they were both part of. I don't know, she said honestly. Every rational part of my brain is telling me to walk away, to pretend Friday night never happened, to focus on my career and forget about everything else. And the irrational part? Alexander asked, moving even closer. Maya could smell his cologne now, could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. The irrational part wants to see what happens if we stop fighting this. Alexander's free hand came up to cup her face, the same tender gesture he had made by the pool. Maya, if we do this, if we explore whatever this is between us, it has to stay completely separate from work. I won't have people saying you earned your position on your back, and I won't have you questioning whether every promotion or opportunity is legitimate. The crude phrasing stung, but Maya understood his point. So we compartmentalize. We keep business business and personal personal. Can we do that? Alexander asked. Can we sit in meetings like the one we just had and pretend there's nothing between us? Maya considered the question seriously. The past 2 hours had been among the most difficult of her professional life, and that was just dealing with the aftermath of a single kiss. If they became involved, really involved, could she handle the constant strain of hiding her feelings? I honestly don't know, she said, but I think I want to try. Something shifted in Alexander's expression at her words. The careful control he maintained slipped just enough to reveal the desire underneath. Are you sure? He asked. Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to the way things were. Maya thought about her apartment, empty and sterile, about the careful boundaries she had maintained for years, about the way she had felt floating in that moonlit pool with infinite possibilities stretching out before her. I'm tired of being careful, she said. I'm tired of always doing the safe thing, the smart thing, the thing that protects my career above everything else. Alexander smiled then, the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him in a professional setting. So am I. God knows I've been doing the safe thing my entire life. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but Maya rose to meet him halfway. This kiss was different from the one by the pool, where that had been exploratory and tentative. This was certain and claiming. Maya felt herself melting against him, her hands finding their way to his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath the expensive fabric of his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Alexander rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. We're really doing this, he said, and it wasn't a question. We're really doing this, Maya confirmed, still not entirely believing it herself. Alexander opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that made her knees weak. Then, we need rules. Clear boundaries between work and personal. Complete discretion. And if either of us decides it's not working, we end it cleanly with no impact on your career. Maya nodded, understanding the necessity of such parameters even as part of her rebelled against reducing their connection to a set of guidelines. "When do we start?" she asked. Alexander glanced at his watch, then at the conference room door. "Tonight. Dinner. Somewhere private where we can talk without worrying about being seen." "Your place or mine?" Maya asked, then immediately regretted the implications of the question. Alexander's eyes darkened. "Mine. I'll cook." The image of Alexander Sterling, billionaire CEO, cooking dinner in his kitchen was so unexpected that Maya almost laughed. "You cook?" "I have many hidden talents," Alexander said with a hint of smugness. "You might be surprised." Before Maya could respond, they heard voices in the hallway outside the conference room. Alexander immediately stepped away from her, smoothing his tie and resuming his professional demeanor so quickly it was almost jarring. "I'll have Jennifer send you the address," he said in his normal business tone, just as Robertson appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt," Robert said, looking between them with mild curiosity. "Alexander, the Yamamoto presentation moved up to 3 o'clock. I wanted to make sure you had the updated figures." "Of course," Alexander replied smoothly. Maya was just clarifying some points about the demographic data. "We're finished here." Maya gathered her materials again, acutely aware that she needed to appear completely normal despite feeling like her entire world had just shifted on its axis. "I'll get those revised projections to you by this afternoon," she said to Alexander, falling back into their familiar professional rhythm. "Perfect. Thank you for staying late on Friday to complete the analysis. Your dedication doesn't go unnoticed." The words were innocuous enough, but Maya caught the subtle emphasis, the acknowledgement of what had really happened Friday night. She nodded professionally and headed for the door, feeling Alexander's eyes on her as she left. The rest of the day passed in a haze of routine tasks and mounting anticipation. Maya found herself checking her phone constantly, waiting for the message with Alexander's address. When it finally came, sent from his personal number rather than through his assistant, Maya felt her pulse quicken. The text was brief and professional. 1847 Belmont Avenue, Penthouse. 7 p.m. A.S. Maya stared at the message for a long time, still not quite believing that this was really happening. In a few hours, she would cross a line that would change everything between them. There would be no hiding behind corporate protocols or professional distance. It would be just her and Alexander, without the armor of their business personas. She spent the remainder of the afternoon trying to focus on work while her mind raced with possibilities and concerns. What did one wear to dinner with one's billionaire boss turned potential lover? How did one navigate the transition from employee to whatever she was about to become? As 5 o'clock approached, Maya found herself paralyzed with nervous energy. She had made a decision that went against every career-focused instinct she possessed, but for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like a descent into a new reality. Maya caught her reflection in the polished metal doors and saw a woman she barely recognized. Her eyes were bright with anticipation, her cheeks flushed with excitement rather than the stress that usually colored her features at the end of a long day. As she walked through the lobby and out into the sea, Maya stood outside the glass tower that housed Alexander's penthouse, her heart hammering against her ribs as she studied her reflection in the lobby's polished surfaces. She had changed clothes 3 times before settling on a simple black dress that could be interpreted as either professional or personal, a small rebellion against the impossible task of choosing the right outfit for dining with her billionaire boss turned unexpected romantic interest. The doorman, impeccably dressed and utterly professional, greeted her by name before she could announce herself. "Good evening, Ms. Rodriguez. Mr. Sterling is expecting you. The private elevator is just through here." Maya followed him through the opulent lobby, past marble columns and abstract sculptures that probably cost more than her annual salary. The private elevator required a key card to access, another reminder of the rarefied world she was about to enter. As the elevator climbed silently toward the penthouse, Maya tried to calm her racing thoughts. She had researched Alexander's building during a moment of weakness that afternoon, learning that he owned the entire top floor of the 40-story tower. The penthouse had been featured in architectural magazines, praised for its minimalist design and breathtaking views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains. The elevator opened directly into Alexander's home, and Maya stepped into a space that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the living area, offering a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline as the last light of day faded into evening. The furnishings were elegantly simple, all clean lines and neutral colors that emphasized the spectacular setting rather than competing with it. Alexander appeared from what Maya assumed was the kitchen, and she was struck by how different he looked in his own environment. He had changed from his business suit into dark jeans and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. It was the most casual she had ever seen him, and the effect was both humanizing and devastatingly attractive. "You found it," he said, and Maya could hear a note of nervousness in his voice that matched her own anxiety. "Hard to miss," Maya replied, gesturing at the spectacular view. "This is incredible." Alexander followed her gaze to the windows, but Maya noticed he was watching her reaction more than appreciating the scenery himself. "I sometimes forget how impressive it can be. You get used to it after a while." The admission offered a glimpse into a life Maya could barely imagine, where spectacular luxury became mundane through constant exposure. She wondered what it would be like to have so much beauty and privilege that it ceased to register as special. "Can I offer you some wine?" Alexander asked. "I have a Pinot Noir that I think you'd enjoy." Maya nodded, grateful for something to do with her hands and a reason to calm her nerves. She watched Alexander move to a sleek bar area, noting the easy confidence with which he navigated his own space. Everything here reflected his taste and personality in a way that his corporate office never could. "I have to admit," Maya said, accepting the glass of wine he offered, "I'm having trouble reconciling this version of you with the CEO who runs board meetings." Alexander smiled, the same genuine expression she had glimpsed in the conference room earlier. "Which version is more surprising?" "Both," Maya said honestly. "I've worked for you for 3 years, and I'm realizing I barely know you at all." "That's intentional," Alexander said, settling onto the sofa and gesturing for Maya to join him. "I learned early that people treat you differently when they know too much about your personal life. It's easier to maintain authority when there's some mystery." Maya sat on the opposite end of the sofa, maintaining a careful distance even as every instinct urged her to move closer. "So this is you letting me behind the curtain?" "This is me hoping there's still something worth knowing back here," Alexander said quietly. The vulnerability in his voice made Maya's chest tighten. She was beginning to understand that beneath all the wealth and power, Alexander Sterling might be just as lonely and uncertain as she often felt. "Tell me something real," Maya said impulsively. "Something you've never told anyone at the company." Alexander considered the request, swirling the wine in his glass as he stared out at the darkening city. "I never wanted to run Sterling Industries. When my father died, I was planning to sell the company and use my inheritance to start a nonprofit focused on environmental conservation." Maya felt her eyes widen in surprise. The revelation was so contrary to everything she thought she knew about Alexander's ambition and drive. "What changed your mind?" she asked. "Guilt, mostly," Alexander said with a rueful smile. "The company employed thousands of people, had contracts worth billions of dollars. I couldn't bring myself to destroy something my father had spent his life building, even if it meant giving up my own dreams." Maya studied his profile as he spoke, seeing the weight of those abandoned dreams in the set of his shoulders. "Do you regret it?" "Every day," Alexander said simply. "But I've tried to find ways to make the company better, more socially responsible. It's not the life I planned, but maybe it's the life I was meant to have." The honesty in his words made Maya want to reach out and comfort him, but she sensed that sympathy wasn't what he was looking for. Instead, she offered her own truth in return. "I never planned to work in corporate marketing either," she said. "I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker. I was going to expose injustices and change the world through storytelling." "What happened?" Alexander asked, turning to face her fully. "Student loans happened. Family obligations happened. Life happened," Maya said with a shrug that didn't quite hide her own sense of loss. "Turns out idealism doesn't pay the bills." Alexander nodded in understanding. "We're both living lives we didn't choose." "Maybe," Maya said. "Or maybe we're living the lives we needed to live to become the people we needed to be." Something shifted in Alexander's expression at her words. He set down his wine glass and moved closer to her on the sofa, close enough that Maya could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I've been thinking about that," he said, "about how all the choices I made, even the ones that felt like compromises, led me to this moment. Led me to you." Maya's breath caught at the intensity in his voice. "Alexander, I know this is complicated," he said, reaching out to brush a strand of hair behind her ear. "I know there are 1,000 reasons why we shouldn't be here together, but I can't bring myself to care about any of them right now." Maya leaned into his touch, her resolve crumbling as it had by the pool. "Neither can I." When Alexander kissed her this time, it was with a certainty that had been missing from their previous encounters. This wasn't a moment of weakness or poor judgment. It was a deliberate choice they were both making with full awareness of the consequences. Maya lost herself in the sensation, in the way Alexander's hands tangled in her hair, in the taste of wine on his lips. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and the careful distance Maya had maintained on the sofa had completely disappeared. "I should check on dinner," Alexander said, though he made no move to get up. "Is something going to burn?" Maya asked, her voice slightly breathless. "Probably not," Alexander admitted, then smiled. "I may have exaggerated my culinary skills slightly. I ordered from your favorite restaurant." Maya blinked in surprise. "How do you know my favorite restaurant?" Alexander looked almost embarrassed. "I may have noticed where you order lunch from when you're working late. Giuseppe's, right? You always get the salmon risotto." The admission that he had been paying such close attention to her habits sent a thrill through Maya that had nothing to do with physical attraction. It suggested a level of interest and awareness that went far beyond professional obligation. "You've been watching me," she said, and it wasn't an accusation. "For years," Alexander confirmed. "Trying not to, but failing consistently." Maya felt a surge of boldness, fueled by wine and desire and the intoxicating knowledge that her attraction hadn't been one-sided. "What else have you noticed?" Alexander's eyes darkened at her question. "I notice everything about you, Maya. The way you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating. The way you always take the stairs instead of the elevator when you're stressed. The way you laugh when something genuinely amuses you versus when you're just being polite." Each observation hit Maya like a small shock of recognition. She had no idea she was so transparent, or that anyone was paying such close attention to her unconscious habits. "That's slightly terrifying," she said. "Is it?" Alexander asked, moving even closer. "Because I was hoping it was flattering." Maya considered the question seriously. In any other context, such intense observation might have felt invasive or inappropriate. But, coming from Alexander, delivered with such obvious affection and desire, it felt like the highest form of compliment. "It's flattering," she admitted. "And terrifying. And incredibly arousing." Alexander's sharp intake of breath told Maya her honesty had affected him as much as his confessions had affected her. She felt a surge of feminine power, the knowledge that she could impact this controlled, powerful man so profoundly. "Maya," he said, her name rough on his lips. "If we continue this conversation, I'm not going to be able to stop at just talking." Maya looked into his eyes, seeing desire and restraint warring in their depths. She thought about all the careful choices she had made throughout her career, all the times she had chosen safety over possibility, security over adventure. "Who says I want you to stop?" she asked. Alexander's control finally snapped. He pulled Maya against him, his mouth finding hers with a hunger that took her breath away. Maya responded with equal intensity, all the attraction and longing she had suppressed for years finally finding expression. They kissed with the desperate urgency of people who had been denying themselves something essential. Maya's hands found their way under Alexander's shirt, exploring the warm skin she had only glimpsed by the pool. Alexander's touch was everywhere, reverent and possessive at once, as if he were trying to memorize every inch of her. When the need for air finally forced them apart, Maya found herself pulled onto Alexander's lap, her dress hiked up around her thighs, her hair disheveled beyond any hope of professional respectability. "This is insane," she gasped, even as her hands continued their exploration of his chest. "Completely," Alexander agreed, his voice rough with desire. "Do you want to stop?" Maya looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the corporate executive to the man who ordered her favorite food and noticed her unconscious habits and carried the weight of unwanted responsibilities. She saw someone who was just as lost and lonely as she sometimes felt, someone who had been watching her with the same careful attention she had been paying to him. "No," she said firmly. "I don't want to stop." Alexander's smile was triumphant and tender at once. "Good, because I've been fantasizing about this for far longer than I should admit." "Tell me," Maya said impulsively. "Tell me what you've been thinking about." Alexander's hands stilled on her waist, and Maya could see surprise flicker across his features. Clearly, he hadn't expected such boldness from her. "Are you sure you want to know?" he asked. Maya nodded, emboldened by wine and desire and the intoxicating knowledge that this powerful man had been wanting her just as much as she had been wanting him. Alexander's voice dropped to a near whisper as he began to speak, describing fantasies that made Maya's pulse race and her skin flush with heat. He told her about imagining her in his office after hours, about dreams of pushing her up against the conference room windows, about nights when he had lain awake thinking about what she would look like without the professional barriers she kept so carefully in place. Each confession made Maya feel more reckless, more willing to abandon the careful control that had governed her entire adult life. She found herself sharing her own secret thoughts, admitting to fantasies about staying late at the office just to be alone with him, about imagining what his hands would feel like on her skin during boring board meetings. Their confessions became increasingly intimate, fueled by physical desire and the intoxicating freedom of finally being honest about their attraction. Maya felt as though she were discovering a new version of herself, one who was bold and sensual and unafraid to claim what she wanted. When Alexander finally stood, lifting Maya with him as if she weighed nothing at all, she didn't protest. When he carried her toward what she assumed was his bedroom, she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed the spot where his pulse was racing beneath his skin. "Last chance to change your mind," Alexander said as he paused outside his bedroom door. Maya looked at him, this man who represented everything she had thought she wanted to avoid in her professional life, who had somehow become everything she actually wanted in her personal life. "I'm exactly where I want to be," she said. Alexander's bedroom was as elegantly appointed as the rest of the penthouse, but Maya barely noticed the decor. Her attention was focused entirely on the man setting her gently on her feet beside his bed, on the way he was looking at her, as if she were something precious and perfect. When he reached for the zipper of her dress, his movements were slow and deliberate, giving her every opportunity to stop him. But Maya found herself leaning into his touch instead, helping him remove the barriers between them with an eagerness that would have shocked her professional persona. Later, as they lay tangled together in Alexander's bed, Maya marveled at how different everything felt. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, and she could feel Alexander's heartbeat slowly returning to normal beneath her cheek. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, voicing the question that had been lurking beneath all their passion. Alexander's arms tightened around her slightly. "Now we figure out how to make this work without destroying everything else in our lives." Maya lifted her head to look at him, seeing uncertainty mixed with satisfaction in his expression. "Can we do that?" "I don't know," Alexander said honestly. "But I'm willing to try if you are." Maya considered all the complications. The Maya woke to the soft gray light of Seattle dawn filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar luxury surrounding her. Alexander's penthouse bedroom was bathed in the gentle illumination of sunrise over Elliott Bay, and Maya lay still for several minutes, absorbing the reality of where she was and what had happened between them. Alexander was still asleep beside her, his face peaceful and younger-looking without the constant tension he carried during business hours. Maya studied his features in the morning light, noting details she had never been close enough to see before. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when it wasn't perfectly styled, the subtle lines around his eyes that spoke of years of responsibility and careful control. As if sensing her scrutiny, Alexander stirred, his eyes opening slowly to meet hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke, both processing the transition from the passionate intensity of the night before to the practical reality of morning. "Good morning," Alexander said finally, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," Maya replied, suddenly, acutely aware of her nakedness beneath his expensive sheets, of the way her hair must look after their passionate encounters, of the fact that she had no idea what the protocol was for morning after conversations with one's billionaire boss. Alexander seemed to sense her uncertainty. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face with the same gentle touch that had undone her by the pool. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. Maya considered the question seriously. By all logical standards, she should be panicking, already calculating the damage to her career and reputation. Instead, she felt a sense of completion, as if something that had been out of alignment for years had finally clicked into place. "No regrets," she confirmed. "You?" Alexander's smile was soft and genuine, lacking any of the calculated charm he employed in business settings. "None, though I suspect the day ahead will test that resolve." The reminder of their return to the corporate world sent a small chill through Maya. In a few hours, they would both be back in Sterling Industries, surrounded by colleagues and responsibilities and all the reasons why their relationship was impossible. "About those rules," Maya said, pulling the sheet higher around herself. "Maybe we should discuss them before we have to pretend this never happened," Alexander finished. "You're right. Coffee first. Then, we figure out how to navigate this." Alexander slipped from the bed, unself-conscious in his nudity in a way that made Maya's pulse quicken all over again. He pulled on a pair of pajama pants and a t-shirt, then disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts and the spectacular view of the awakening city. Maya found her dress from the night before and slipped it on, feeling somehow more vulnerable fully clothed than she had naked in Alexander's arms. The transition from intimate to practical felt jarring, a preview of the constant code switching they would need to master if they were going to make this work. When she emerged from the bedroom, Maya found Alexander in the kitchen, which was as sleekly appointed as the rest of the penthouse. He was standing at an expensive espresso machine, and the domestic scene felt surreal after years of only seeing him in corporate settings. "Impressive kitchen for someone who orders takeout," Maya observed, accepting the perfectly crafted cappuccino he offered. "I cook when I can't sleep," Alexander admitted, "which is more often than I'd like to admit. I find it calming." The admission offered another glimpse into the private struggles of a man who appeared to have everything under control from the outside. Maya wondered what other vulnerabilities and complexities lay beneath Alexander's polished exterior. They settled at his breakfast table, which offered another breathtaking view of the Sound and the mountains beyond. In the distance, Maya could see the Sterling Industries building where they would both be expected to perform their professional roles in a few hours. "So," Alexander said, following her gaze. "Ground rules." Maya nodded, forcing herself to focus on practicalities rather than the way the morning light played across his features. Complete separation between work and personal. No preferential treatment. No intimate conversations at the office. No lingering looks across conference tables. "Agreed," Alexander said. "Your career advancement continues on exactly the same trajectory it was on before. Any promotions or opportunities you receive will be based solely on merit, and I'll document everything to ensure there's never any question about your qualifications." Maya felt a surge of gratitude for his understanding of how precarious her position could become. Discretion is crucial. If people suspect there's something between us, it undermines everything I've worked for. "Complete discretion," Alexander confirmed. "No public appearances together. No overnight stays when you have early meetings, separate travel arrangements for business trips." The litany of restrictions felt both necessary and depressing. Maya found herself wondering if they were making their relationship so complicated that it would collapse under the weight of its own constraints. "This is going to be incredibly difficult," she said quietly. Alexander reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. "It is. But, Maya, what I feel for you, it's not just attraction or convenience or some kind of power fantasy. I think I'm falling in love with you." The confession hit Maya like a physical blow. She had been prepared for passion, for chemistry, for a complicated physical relationship that they would have to carefully manage. But love was something else entirely, something that made all their careful rules seem both more important and completely inadequate. "Alexander," she began, but he held up his free hand to stop her. "I'm not asking you to say it back," he said quickly. "I just need you to know that this isn't casual for me. I'm not interested in a brief affair or a stress relief arrangement. I want something real with you, something that lasts." Maya felt her chest tighten with emotion she wasn't prepared to examine too closely. "That makes this even more complicated." "I know," Alexander said, "but it also makes it worth the complications." Maya studied his face, seeing sincerity and vulnerability in his expression. She thought about her careful 5-year plan, about the reputation she had built, about all the reasons why falling in love with her boss was professional suicide. Then, she thought about the way she had felt in his arms, about the ease of their conversation the night before, about the way he noticed small details about her that no one else had ever paid attention to. "I think I might be falling in love with you too," she admitted quietly. "Which terrifies me." Alexander's smile was radiant. "Good terrified or bad terrified?" "Both," Maya said honestly. "I've never mixed business with pleasure before. I've built my entire career on being professional and appropriate and keeping clear boundaries. And now," Alexander prompted, "now I'm sitting in my boss's kitchen wearing last night's dress, planning how to conduct a secret relationship that could destroy everything I've worked for." Maya shook her head in amazement. 6 months ago, if someone had told me this is where I'd be, I would have thought they were insane. Alexander brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Life has a way of disrupting our best-laid plans." Before Maya could respond, Alexander's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the display and sighed. "Robert Chun," he said, "probably about the Yamamoto merger. I need to take this." Maya nodded, understanding the immediate return to business mode that the call required. She watched Alexander's entire demeanor shift as he answered the phone, his voice becoming crisp and authoritative, his posture straightening into the commanding presence she knew from the boardroom. The conversation was brief and technical, focused on financial projections and negotiation strategies. Maya found herself studying this transformation, realizing how skillfully Alexander compartmentalized different aspects of his life. When he ended the call, Alexander looked at Maya with an expression that was almost apologetic. "The merger is accelerating. I'm going to have a series of early meetings today, starting at 7:30. Maya glanced at her watch and felt a stab of panic. It was already 6:45, and she needed to go home, shower, change clothes, and somehow transform herself back into the polished marketing executive who could sit across a conference table from Alexander Sterling without betraying any sign of their intimate connection. "I should go," she said, standing quickly. Alexander stood as well, moving around the table to pull her into his arms. "Maya, we're going to make this work. It won't always be easy, but we'll figure it out." Maya leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his confidence even as her own anxiety mounted. "What if someone sees me leaving your building?" "The parking garage has private access," Alexander said. "I'll have security make sure you can leave discreetly." The fact that he had already considered such details both impressed and worried Maya. It suggested a level of experience with situations requiring discretion that she wasn't sure she wanted to examine too closely. "Will I see you today?" she asked, then immediately felt foolish for the question. "The 10 o'clock marketing review," Alexander said. "And Maya? It's going to be purely professional. I need you to be prepared for me to treat you exactly as I always have in meetings." Maya nodded, understanding the necessity, but already dreading the return to formal distance. "I can handle it." Alexander cupped her face in his hands, studying her expression carefully. "Are you sure? Because if this is going to work, we both need to be completely convinced we can maintain appropriate boundaries at work." Maya thought about the previous day's meeting, about how difficult it had been to concentrate with Alexander in the room, about the constant awareness of his presence that had made normal conversation feel like an elaborate performance. "I'll figure it out," she said with more confidence than she felt. Alexander kissed her then, soft and lingering, and Maya tried to memorize the sensation, knowing it would have to last her through long hours of professional pretense. "I'll miss you," he whispered against her lips. "It's only a few hours," Maya pointed out. "It's going to feel like forever," Alexander said, then smiled ruefully. "I'm already in deeper than I thought possible." Maya felt her heart constrict at the admission. "Me too." The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt like a descent back into reality. Maya checked her appearance in the mirrored walls, trying to smooth her hair and straighten her dress enough to avoid looking obviously disheveled. The security guard Alexander had mentioned was waiting by her car, professional and discreet, giving no sign that he found anything unusual about the situation. The drive back to her apartment passed in a blur of morning traffic and racing thoughts. Maya's mind kept returning to Alexander's confession of love, to the weight of reciprocal feelings she wasn't ready to fully acknowledge, to the impossibility of the situation they had created. Her apartment felt smaller than ever when she finally arrived, cramped and impersonal compared to the luxury of Alexander's penthouse. Maya stripped off her dress and headed directly for the shower, hoping the hot water would help her transition back into her professional persona. As she stood under the spray, Maya tried to prepare herself mentally for the day ahead. She would need to be flawless in her performance, giving no one any reason to suspect that her relationship with Alexander had changed in any way. One slip, one lingering look, one moment of obvious intimacy, and her career could be over. Maya dressed with particular care, choosing a charcoal gray suit that projected authority and competence. She spent extra time on her hair and makeup, creating a polished appearance that would armor her against any questions about her personal life. By the time she arrived at Sterling Industries, Maya felt as ready as she could be for the challenge ahead. The familiar routine of badging into the building and riding the elevator to her floor helped reinforce her sense of professional identity. But as Maya settled at her desk and began reviewing her notes for the marketing review, she found her attention constantly drifting to thoughts of Alexander. Every time she tried to focus on campaign strategies or demographic analyses, her mind returned to the feeling of his hands on her skin, to the vulnerability in his voice when he told her he was falling in love with her. Jennifer appeared at her desk with a stack of reports and a concerned expression. "Are you feeling all right? You seem distracted." Maya forced herself to focus on her assistant's face, hoping her inner turmoil wasn't as obvious as it felt. "Just tired. I stayed late last night working on the Morrison presentation." It wasn't technically a lie, but Maya felt guilty about the deception nonetheless. She had always prided herself on her honesty and transparency with her team. "The conference room is ready for the 10 o'clock review," Jennifer continued. Mr. Sterling's assistant confirmed he'll be attending, along with the usual department heads. The marketing review meeting began exactly as Maya had expected and dreaded. Alexander entered the conference room at precisely 10 o'clock, his demeanor professionally distant, his attention focused on the agenda rather than on her. Maya watched him take his seat at the head of the table, noting how completely he had transformed back into the commanding CEO who had intimidated her during her first days at the company. "Good morning, everyone," Alexander said, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone Maya had heard thousands of times before. "Let's begin with the third quarter campaign performance analysis." Maya presented her data with the same confidence and clarity she had always brought to these meetings, but internally, she felt as though she were performing an elaborate charade. Every time Alexander asked a question or offered strategic guidance, she had to consciously suppress the memory of his hands on her skin, his whispered confessions of love, the vulnerable way he had looked at her in the morning light. The most challenging moment came when Alexander questioned one of her demographic targeting strategies, his tone purely professional, but his green eyes focused intently on her face. For a split second, Maya felt herself faltering, caught between the memory of those same eyes looking at her with desire and the necessity of responding as his employee rather than his lover. "The 18 to 24 demographic shows strong engagement with our digital campaigns," Maya said, recovering her composure quickly. "However, the conversion rates suggest we need to refine our messaging to drive actual purchases rather than just social media interactions." Alexander nodded approvingly, making notes on his tablet. "Excellent analysis. I'd like to see a revised strategy proposal by Friday. Of course, Maya replied. And, to any observer, the exchange would have appeared completely normal. But Maya caught the brief softening in Alexander's expression, a fleeting moment of warmth that disappeared so quickly she might have imagined it. The meeting concluded without incident, and Maya felt a surge of relief mixed with pride. They had successfully navigated their first professional interaction since becoming involved, maintaining appropriate boundaries while conducting necessary business. But, as the other executives filed out of the conference room, Alexander's voice stopped her at the door. Maya, could you stay for a moment? I have some questions about the Morrison account. Maya turned back, her pulse quickening at the prospect of being alone with him. The conference room suddenly felt smaller, more intimate, despite being the same space where they conducted routine business. Alexander waited until the door closed behind the last departing executive before speaking again. When he did, his voice was softer, more personal. How are you doing with this? He asked quietly. That was harder than I expected. Maya felt some of her tension ease at his admission. It was like performing a role I've been playing for years, except now I'm hyper-aware that it's a performance. Alexander moved closer, though he was careful to maintain a professional distance in case anyone entered unexpectedly. You were flawless. No one could have guessed anything had changed between us. Years of practice at keeping my personal feelings separate from work, Maya said with a rueful smile. I just never thought I'd need to hide feelings from my boss. I wanted to touch you so badly during that presentation, Alexander admitted, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Watching you command that room, seeing your brilliant mind at work, it was incredibly difficult to remember I was supposed to be maintaining professional distance. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks at his words. Alexander, we can't talk like this here. Someone could walk in. You're right, he said, immediately stepping back. I'm sorry. It's going to take some adjustment to learn when and where we can be ourselves. Before Maya could respond, the conference room door opened and Robert Shin entered, looking between them with mild curiosity. Sorry to interrupt, Robert said. Alexander, the Yamamoto representatives are here for the 11:30 meeting. They arrived early. Of course they did, Alexander said, his professional mask sliding back into place seamlessly. Maya, we'll continue this discussion about the Morrison account later. Please send me your preliminary thoughts by email. Certainly, Maya replied, gathering her materials. I'll have something to you by this afternoon. As Maya left the conference room, she felt the familiar disorientation of switching between personas. The ease with which both she and Alexander could slip in and out of their professional roles was both impressive and slightly disturbing. She wondered if they would always have to live this double life, carefully compartmentalizing their feelings to protect their careers. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks and mounting anticipation. Maya found herself checking her phone constantly, hoping for messages from Alexander while simultaneously dreading any communication that might compromise their discretion. When her assistant mentioned that Mr. Sterling would be working late on merger preparations, Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest at the thought of not seeing him. It was nearly 8 o'clock when Maya finally decided to leave the office. The executive floor was mostly empty, with only a few dedicated workaholics still at their desks. As she passed Alexander's corner office, Maya noticed his door was slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the hallway. She paused, torn between professional propriety and personal desire. After a moment of internal debate, she knocked softly on the doorframe. Come in, Alexander's voice called from within. Maya entered to find Alexander at his desk, surrounded by financial reports and legal documents. He looked tired, the careful composure he maintained during business hours showing signs of strain around the edges. Working late again? Maya asked, closing the door behind her. Alexander looked up, and his expression immediately softened when he saw her. The Yamamoto merger is more complicated than we initially thought. There are some regulatory concerns that need to be addressed before we can move forward. Maya moved closer to his desk, noting the empty coffee cups and takeout containers that suggested he had been working without breaks. Have you eaten anything besides coffee and whatever that was? She asked, gesturing at the food containers. I had lunch, Alexander said defensively, then paused to consider. Actually, that might have been yesterday's lunch. Maya felt a surge of concern for him. In all their professional interactions, she had never seen Alexander look quite so overwhelmed by the demands of his position. "This is exactly why you need someone to take care of you," Maya said without thinking, then immediately regretted the presumptuous statement. But Alexander's expression brightened at her words. "Are you volunteering for the position?" "I," Maya began, then stopped, realizing they were venturing into dangerous territory. "We shouldn't be having this conversation here." Alexander glanced at his watch, then at the darkened windows that showed the city lights beginning to twinkle in the evening twilight. "You're right. But, Maya, I've been thinking about you all day. This separation between work and personal is going to be more difficult than I anticipated." Maya felt the same magnetic pull she had experienced by the pool, the same sense that all her careful boundaries were dissolving in Alexander's presence. "Someone could see us." "Everyone's gone home," Alexander said, standing and moving around his desk toward her. "The cleaning crew doesn't arrive until 10. Maya knew she should leave, should maintain the professional distance they had agreed was essential. Instead, she found herself stepping closer to Alexander, drawn by the exhaustion in his eyes and the way he was looking at her, as if she were the only thing keeping him grounded. "This is exactly what we said we wouldn't do," Maya whispered as Alexander's arms came around her. "I know," he replied, pulling her against him. "But I missed you." 8 hours felt like 8 days. When Alexander kissed her, Maya felt all her resolve crumble. The stress of performing their professional charade, the constant vigilance required to hide their feelings, the sheer effort of pretending indifference to the man she was falling in love with, all of it melted away in the warmth of his embrace. They were so absorbed in each other that neither of them heard the soft sound of footsteps in the hallway outside. It wasn't until a sharp intake of breath made them spring apart that they realized they were no longer alone. Victoria Hartwell, the company's chief operating officer and one of the most influential executives in the organization, stood in the doorway of Alexander's office. Her expression was a mixture of shock and calculation that made Maya's blood run. The reminder that she would be seeing Alexander in less than an hour made Maya's pulse quicken. "Perfect. I'll be ready." But as Maya gathered her materials and tried to focus on the presentation she would be giving, she wondered if she would ever truly be ready for the challenge of loving Alexander Sterling while maintaining the professional facade that protected them both. The next few hours would be her first real test of whether their carefully planned compartmentalization could actually work in practice. Maya had built her career on her ability to remain composed and professional under pressure, but she had never faced pressure quite like this before. As 10 o'clock approached, Maya made her way to the conference room, her heart hammering with an intensity that had nothing to do with presentation nerves. She was about to find out whether love and professionalism could coexist, or whether their passionate night together had irreparably complicated everything she had worked so hard to achieve. The stakes had never been higher, and Maya had never been more uncertain about her ability to navigate the challenge ahead. But as she thought about Alexander's words about falling in love, about his commitment to making their relationship work despite all the obstacles, Maya found a reserve of determination she didn't know she possessed. She would make this work, whatever the cost. The alternative, losing either Alexander or her career, was unthinkable. Tea awaited them, all the careful maneuvering they would have to do to keep their personal and professional lives separate. It should have been daunting enough to send her running back to the safety of pure professionalism. Instead, as she looked at Alexander's face in the dim light filtering through the windows, Maya felt only a sense of rightness, as if all the careful choices and compromises that had brought her to this moment had been leading to something inevitable and necessary. "I'm willing to try," she said, then kissed him softly. "But we're going to need those rules you mentioned." Alexander smiled against her lips. "Tomorrow, tonight, let's just be us without any complications." Maya settled back against his chest, listening to his heartbeat and watching the city lights paint patterns across the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring all the challenges of navigating their new relationship within the constraints of corporate propriety. But tonight, she was content to exist in this perfect bubble of intimacy and possibility, where the only thing that mattered was the warmth of Alexander's skin against hers and the steady rhythm of his breathing as he fell asleep, holding her close. Till evening, Maya realized that she was about to discover not just who Alexander Sterling was beneath his corporate facade, but who she herself could be when she stopped hiding behind carefully constructed barriers. The city lights were just beginning to flicker on as Maya made her way home to prepare for an evening that would either be the beginning of something extraordinary or the most spectacular professional mistake of her life. But as she thought about the way Alexander had looked at her in the conference room, the way his touch had made her feel by the pool, Maya found that she was willing to risk everything to find out which it would be. Hard. Alexander rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if he were trying to memorize the moment. "What are we doing?" he asked, though his arms remained around her. Maya looked up at him, seeing uncertainty and desire warring in his expression. She thought about her careful career plans, about the reputation she had built, about all the reasons why this was impossible. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I don't want to stop." Alexander opened his eyes, studying her face in the blue-tinted light. "Neither do I. God help me, neither do I."